Welcome back to the Journey podcast, where we talk about the people, moments, and values that shape who we become. Today's guest needs no introduction. University of Houston's men's basketball head coach, Coach Kelvin Sampson. Today's episode is not just about basketball, Final Fours, or trophies. It's about fatherhood, family, and faith through the eyes of one of the most respected coaches in college basketball. About raising kids while leading programs, about what happens when lessons in the locker room come home to the dinner table. Coach Sampson, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Bella.
Let's start from the beginning.
Okay.
When did you fall in love with basketball?
Well, I think your intro was poignant because that's kind of how it started. My dad was a high school coach. I think this coming spring they're going to retire his jersey because he was the all-time leading scorer at in the history of the university that he played with. But we also grew up in segregation. So being a segregation kid, we kind of had our own world, you know. My earliest memories of basketball was following my dad to Magnolia High School, right outside of Lumberton, North Carolina. I couldn't go during the week, but for some reason, he always practiced on Saturdays. Okay. And he would have one of the managers look after me. They'd give me a ball and put me over here in the side of the gym. They had a blanket. I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I remember his name. His name was Big Curtis Olson. So that would have been like in 1961, 62, somewhere in there. But my father's influence and the impact he had on my life as a little boy actually started then.
Okay. I saw an interview where you said that you wanted to be just like your dad when you grew up. How did your dad influence your coaching and parenting style?
You know, my father didn't have a lot of great players at his disposal. But his reputation was he could do more with less. For instance, in 2003, he was inducted into the North Carolina High School Coaches Hall of Fame. He went in with 2 other coaches. One was a coach at Shelby Crest High School in Shelby, North Carolina, and the best player that coach had was David Thompson, who was one of the top 50 players in the history of the NBA. The other coach that went in was a coach at Little Washington High School, and his best player was Dominique Wilkins. So my dad goes in, and you know, he didn't have players. Players like that. He was stuck with little point guard Kelvin and a bunch of local kids that loved the game, and he inspired that love in us. Most of the kids in that community came from farming communities. Okay. So he found a way to always have the gym open in the summers at night. And so after getting up early and working late, guys would come up to the gym and we played 3-on-3, 2-on-2, 4-on-4. Rarely ever did we have enough for 5-on-5, but that was him showing me his passion for the game, helping kids get better. But that always stayed with me. But the one story that I think epitomized what he was about was most of the kids that I played with rode a bus to school. I don't remember any of them having a car, but they all rode a bus. And I rode with my dad to school when I was in high school. So when practice was over, the girls practiced right after high school. We only had one gym. So the girls would practice right as soon as school was over, and then the boys would practice after the girls. So usually practice was over around 6:30 or 7. And he had this car. It was a 1963 Falcon, 3 in the tree. I think he bought that car for $150 from one of the other football coaches. But back then there was no seat belts, no bucket seats. It was just a board seat. And I remember having to sit in the lap of one of the players, and he'd have 8 or 9. You'd probably only supposed to have 5 in there, but we'd have 8 or 9, maybe even more. But he would drop each kid off at their home because they didn't have another ride. And a lot of them lived anywhere from 3 to 6 miles away. And if my dad didn't take them home, usually they had to walk. So years later, growing up in that community, I saw the impact he had on those kids and their families. And that really made an impression on me. And when I saw how they reacted to him years later, I said, what an awesome job it is to be a coach and the impact you can have on these kids' lives. So that's when I said, I want to be a coach.
So growing up in a small community like that, basketball definitely means family. So when your kids were little, what did a typical day look like in the Sampson household?
Well, when I graduated from college, I got an academic scholarship to go to Michigan State University. It was funny how I chose Michigan State, because back then, affirmative action for minority students was just coming into universities and athletic departments. So I had a twin sister, and she was a smart one, not me, it was her. She was an inorganic chemistry major at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, but she was always a math science girl, but and an athlete. But she always wanted to be a pharmacist. I think my mother, because of her academics, was trying to push her into med school to be a doctor, but she just loved being a pharmacist. So I was playing baseball, and she called me and said, it's raining, and I know that your game's going to get rained out. And on Saturday morning, they're offering the GRE, which is an entrance exam to get into graduate school. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know what she was talking about. But she was going to take it, and being a good twin sister, she called me and said, well, don't you come up here Saturday morning? I said, Saturday morning? That was 100 miles away. And so I drove up early, and I had a good friend on the baseball team at North Carolina. So I stayed in his dorm room, got up and took the GRE. Didn't think anything of it. Actually, I had kind of forgotten I'd taken it. Then my mother got a hold of me and said, you got a letter from some testing center, and it said open right away. And I said, well, go ahead and open it. What does it say? Then it said, here's your score, and because of your score, we're going to put you in this thing called the Minority Locator Code for minority students, and we're going to send your information to all these schools around the country. Didn't think much of that. Then over the next month, I started getting letters from colleges that I know now, but at the time I didn't know what Cal Berkeley was. I didn't know what Cornell was. University of Tennessee, University of North Carolina, schools like that. But my father and I were sitting in his living room in March during the NCAA tournament, and we were watching Michigan State play. And the first thing I noticed, they had this big old 6'9" point guard with the greatest afro I'd ever seen. I mean, as he was running up and down the floor at 6'9", that thing was blowing in the wind. That's the coolest guy I think I've ever seen in my life. And then about that time, maybe the next week, I got a letter from Michigan State. And I opened it and read it. And then at the bottom, the guy that was in charge of the School of Kinesiology and Physiology, his name was Dr. Gail Michaels, Mikels. And he wrote a personal note. He didn't know me, but he wrote a personal note. And I remember telling my girlfriend, who's now my wife, Karen, I said, I think I'm gonna go to Michigan State next year. She said, Michigan State? Where is that? And I said, it's this little town called East Lansing. And so I got an academic scholarship to Michigan State, and it's long story short, finished my master's in 1 year, worked on my PhD for another year. Then all of a sudden I started asking myself, what am I going to do with a PhD? I don't want to teach in college. Kind of odd to be a high school coach and have a PhD. So the basketball coach at Michigan State, who took a liking to me, gave me some great advice. Because in '79 we won the national championship with Magic. Year before was his freshman year. That's when I first saw him. Then the following year we won it all. And at this time I was the assistant coach for the JV team. I was 23 years old at the time. And then I turned 24 the second year. And Coach Heathcote, the varsity coach, got me a job in Montana. Now, I'd never been west of Chicago, so I didn't know what was that way. I'd heard of Montana, but I didn't know where it was on the map. So I was working basketball camp, and one of the guys I was working camp with was this guy named Tom Izzo. He and I were just two young coaches that were just living for today. And went home at lunch, told Karen about the opportunity in Montana. The first thing she did was reach up into her cabinet and pull down an atlas. Now, young people won't know what that means. We didn't have cell phones then. We just certainly didn't have Google or social media. So we had to get our information how we got it. And so and this shows you how smart she was, or maybe how not so smart I was. But she turned the pages, she got to Montana, and she put her finger on Butte. That was where the town was, and it had a black star. And she says, it's got a black star. I said, what does that mean? She said, it means it has a U-Haul drop. I said, a U-Haul drop? Well, how do you think we're going to get out there? We got to put all our stuff in a U-Haul. I hadn't even thought of that. I didn't think we had enough stuff that we had to have a truck with. So we went to Montana. I was 24 years old. When I was 25, I was the head coach. I went out as the assistant coach. So before Christmas, they had named me the head coach because the head coach and his wife moved back to Michigan, where I met him at Michigan State. So long story short, Lauren was born, this was in 1980. Lauren was born in 1983, and Kellen was born in 1985. Karen was 8.5 months pregnant with Kellen when I had another job opportunity being the assistant coach at Washington State University. So Kellen and Lauren were both born in Montana, but they were raised in Pullman, Washington. So we stayed in Pullman for 9 years. I was an assistant for 2, head coach for 7, when the Oklahoma job came up. So Kellen and Lauren, I know Kellen didn't because Karen was still pregnant with him, but Lauren was 3 when we went to Washington. But when we left Washington State to go to Oklahoma, Kellen was a 4th grader. He was 9 years old, and Lauren was 12. She was a 7th grader. So they were coaches' kids. But one of the great blessings for Karen and I was that when we got to Oklahoma, we got to stay 12 years. You know, coaching can be a very transient life. Like I was born in North Carolina, born and raised there, went to school at Michigan State, Montana, Washington State. Now we're in Oklahoma. And so the lessons I learned from my dad really came into play. My mother always tried to make sure he was home so we could have dinner together. I had 3 sisters. And so most nights we did, especially in the off season. And during the season, we very rarely did because he got home so late. But Karen was such an awesome mother and coach's wife that she made it easy for all of us. And her job over the years has, I think, been a big reason why we've all turned out the way we did. She raised Kellen and Lauren probably more than I did, but she also raised me too.
What kind of lessons were you and your wife, Karen, trying to teach your kids before they ever picked up a basketball?
I think the first one was confidence. Your best is good enough. I said that a lot. My dad's saying was, if you work hard, good things happen to people that work hard. My sisters to this day will say that. You know, like when make a Final Four, win a conference championship, I would get a nice text. It's not a letter anymore. They'll text me, and then they'll say, I just remember we always call my father Daddy. Remember what Daddy used to say? If you work hard, good things will happen. And then Kelvin and Lauren, now the thing that they'll tell people is your best is good enough. Don't ever feel like you're better than anybody else, but don't ever feel like they're better than you either. And Karen was really good at that. Now, Kelvin had more of a mischievous side than Lauren. And Karen was really the disciplinarian. Now, Kelvin was rambunctious. I remember in Pullman, he must have been 6 or 7 or 8, and he took a pair of scissors, and I think it was raining outside. And so he was in his bedroom, took a pair of scissors and cut through the screen. And I said, son, what was the plan? I mean, were you trying to escape from jail? I mean, were you going outside? He said, no, I just wanted to see if I could do it. Well, his mother grounded him. Neither one of us was too big on spanking, although my mother and father was big on spanking, but we weren't. And Kelvin and Lauren were, neither one of them gave us much trouble, but Kelvin was the one that was a little mischievous. I think he got grounded for 2 weeks after that. So, but they were easy kids. But sometimes the life you have is the only life you know. So you don't know what Kelvin and Lauren thought everybody's life was like theirs. That their friends' mothers and fathers worked like their mother and father. So, the biggest lessons was the confidence thing. I think if you do a good job raising your children, they're going to do a good job raising their children. And my wife Karen had an awesome mother and father. I had an awesome mother and father. So I think if they were looking down, they'd probably be more proud of the parents we are than what we do in our chosen professions.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about those early school years. You're already deep into your coaching career, long practices, recruiting trips, games on weekends. How did you manage to stay connected to your kids when time was so limited?
So one of the biggest burdens I was a head coach at Washington State when I was 31. And people said, well, that's awesome. Well, if it'd been a really good job, they would have never hired me. And for some reason, my first jobs were jobs that other people probably didn't want. Who hires a 25-year-old head coach? It's an engineering college. They'd never had a winning season before we got there. And my first season was 7-20, and they thought we did pretty good because that was 4 more games than the year before. The year before they went 3 and something. We went 7. But when we got to Washington State, at 31, we kind of had to find a path. And at the time in that league, UCLA was the name. Coach Olson at Arizona was really building the Arizona program. Stanford was rolling. Jason Kidd and that bunch was at Cal. Everybody was good except Washington State. Now this is a true story, Bella. They gave me a 2-year contract. Who gives coaches 2-year contracts? But here's the kicker. My first contract was 2 years, $82,000 total. That was $41,000 a year as the head coach. The big shoe we wore was Converse. So Converse gave me $10,000. So $51,000. I think I made about 15 or so in camp. But I told Karen, and I've always coached and did things with a chip on my shoulder. I told Karen that the reason they hired me was to get to the next coach, because it was late in the cycle when the other coach left and took another job. And Judd Heathcote at Michigan State had graduated from Washington State. So his footprints are all over my career. But being at Washington State, I think it's the most important job I've had for my career, because there was no expectations. Like the coach at Arizona, UCLA, Stanford, they were expected to go deep in the tournament. Washington State's last NCAA tournament appearance, I think, was 1981. And my first year as a head coach was 87. And then we finally made it to the NCAA tournament. And that's when I knew that there was other possibilities, because other schools were trying to hire us. And we were trying to make life decisions, knowing that our children, if we moved, we're going to have to move. They'd have to leave all their friends, leave everything that was comfortable. But sometimes you have to make decisions for the long term. And I remember telling Kellen and Lauren, when I went to Norman, Oklahoma to interview for the job, I really didn't want to go, because we finally had that Washington State program. We were rolling. We'd won 20 games plus in 3 of our last 4 years. We'd made the NCAA tournament, and we had 7 of our top 8 players back. So from where we started it to where we were, I didn't want to go to Oklahoma, because they had to rebuild. I said, wait a minute now, we're better than they are. Why would I leave here and go there? Mm-hmm. And then the administration, this guy's name was John Underwood. John Underwood had Dean Smith, who was the coach at North Carolina at the time, call me because he looked at my bio and saw where that my father and Dean Smith were my 2 biggest role models in coaching. And Coach Smith called the house, and I talked to him, and he got me to realize what cycles are. That every college job, like Washington State, you could win there, but there was always going to be a cycle where you had to rebuild. Mm-hmm. Whereas at a school like Oklahoma, maybe rebuilding year is a 12 seed or a 10 seed. Whereas at Oklahoma, you may not make the tournament. So I said, well, let's go see what this is about. We went and interviewed for the job, got it. And Karen and I were there in our hotel room, and Kellen and Lauren were staying at a friend's house while we were gone. They just thought we were gone. They had no idea what we were doing. Kellen was 9 and Lauren was 12. Lauren kind of knew. Kellen just wanted to go play. So I remember we called the lady they were staying with, and I said, can you put Lauren on the phone? So I talked to Lauren, and I told her what was happening. And I think one of the first things she asked me was, could she bring her friends with her? That's when I realized, they got no clue. And then Kellen, I said, they're going to send a plane for you, Kellen. You're going to fly where we are. So that was on a Sunday. Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, we had a press conference to announce me as the head coach at Oklahoma. But, when you're away, I think about you and your family, mm-hmm. how attached you are. You have your extended family close to you. So Karen and I were born and raised in North Carolina. Kellen and Lauren were raised in Pullman, Washington. Now they were headed to Oklahoma. They never got to see their grandparents. They never got to see their aunts and mm-hmm. uncles, except maybe in the summer, Karen would fly back home while I was out on the road recruiting. So I think the thing that's helped us, and you asked a great question, Bella, about the impact other people have on you. My mother and father did a great job of creating a family. Because being a coach can be a lonely life. Because I remember on Saturday mornings, we had a 2-story house. There was a phone upstairs and a phone downstairs. Basketball games were on Tuesdays and Fridays. Mm-hmm. So on Saturday mornings, the phone would start ringing. And my dad would be downstairs, and I'd go upstairs and pick the phone up because I could hear the conversation. But it was parents calling him and berating him, saying nasty, vile things to him about why he was not letting their child play. And why? And my father always handled those things like a pro. So he never interrupted, and I've learned this over the years. He never interrupted. He let them have their piece, and then when they were done, he would say simply this, and this is another lesson I learned from them. He said, okay, appreciate you calling. I'm going to do everything I can to help your son get better. It's the only thing he would say. Mm-hmm. You know, they wanted an exchange. They wanted to get mad at him. My father was always good at de-escalating. And he gave me 2 lessons that I've tried to pass on to Kellen. He said, number 1, if you start listening to those people sitting there behind you, pretty soon you're going to be sitting with them. He said, number 2, never lose sight of parents. Parents would rather their son make the all-conference team than your team win the conference championship. And both of those things have served me well over the years. And that's why I think the relationships I've had with my kids' parents is because I've always tried to understand where they come from. And never lose sight of the fact that every kid on my team at one point had a father or has a father, but they all have a mother. And I never lose sight of that's their son. Mm-hmm. And I'm coaching their son. You know, a lot of coaches get it twisted that, you know, you're coaching number 12 or this kid's got to do this or this. No, they have a life away from you. As long as you respect that, I think that helps them respect you as well.
When your kids were in elementary school, were their competitive sides starting to show? Or what?
Yes, very much so. Mm-hmm. So the athletic director at Mississippi State, his name is Zach Selman. He was part of a magical time for Oklahoma football. Their coach was a guy named Barry Switzer. But there was 3 brothers, Lucius, Leroy, and Dewey. Now, Dewey's son was Zach. They lived right around the corner from us. Matter of fact, Kellen was the best man in Zach's wedding. Zach was the best man in Kellen's wedding. But they've always had a competitive fire. So 2 doors, 1 street over from us was the guy is now the head coach for the Cincinnati Bengals. Zach's the athletic director at Mississippi State. Kellen's the head coach in waiting here. And there was other guys, but that was a unique experience growing up with all those competitive kids. Mm-hmm. And there was a park where they played baseball in the summer, but year-round football. Always playing tag football, which turned into tackle. None of them's got any equipment on. Can't tell you how many days Kellen came home crying because somebody punched him in the face because he weren't supposed to be tackling. Mm-hmm. But he was, you know, Kellen was 9, 10, 11 back then. But one of the funniest stories, when Kellen was, I think, 6 years old, he was a ball boy for my team at Washington State. And Kellen was a little bit naive. But he had to run into place. He knew his dad was the head coach, and he thought that got him to anywhere he wanted to go. So we were playing UCLA, and their coach was a guy by the name of Jim Herrick. And so right before the game started, we went to our locker room. UCLA went to their locker room. Well, guess which locker room Kellen went to?
UCLA.
He went to UCLA's locker room. Jim Herrick, the coach, told me the story later. I didn't even know about it. He said, I'm up there going through the matchups, what our first plays like, and he looks over, and there's this little kid standing there looking at him. He said, hey, little fella, you gotta leave. So we had no idea about that. Now, Lauren was probably more competitive than Kellen. And Lauren's sport was whatever was in season. Mm-hmm. Like she had 27 points in a game for the Pullman Pacers. I think she was 11 years old. this this may have been the worst collection of basketball players on one team in the history of the game. But Lauren was the best player. So she got to shoot all the balls.
Yeah.
I don't think they ever come close to winning a game. I mean, half the team, when they run, they look at their feet over their shoulders, see what their feet were doing when they were running. I said, this is not a good look, Karen.
That's funny.
Lauren's going to shoot all the balls, but they're going to get killed. So I had to explain to Lauren one time, Lauren, the object of playing basketball is to help your team win. And Lauren said right away, Dad, we're not going to win. But she loved the idea of competing and scoring points and all that stuff. But most of their competitive side came from their dad's team. If we lost games, and we lost a lot of games in my early years at Washington State, they would cry. And we had a little ritual where they always rode to the game with me. And back then it was CDs. You know, you didn't have no playlist or nothing like that. It's whatever CD. So for some reason, now I was more of a Marvin Gaye, Al Green type guy. I like to listen to that music going up to the gym. Whereas we kind of had a Coach Kelvin Lawrence song. It was American Pie by Don McLean. And it was like a 8-minute song. And they knew every word to it. And I would turn it up, put the windows down, and we'd yell at the top of our voice, bye, bye, Miss American Pie, drove my Chevy to it. They knew every word to that song. And so that was our deal, the whole year. I don't remember how many years we did it, but when that song comes on today, that's exactly what I think about.
How did you and your wife, Karen, balance keeping their lives normal as everyone in the community saw you as a local celebrity?
Yeah, when we were losing, it wasn't hard. But we always, the Montana Tech job and the Washington State job, not many expectations until we built it up. I think my last 3 years at Montana Tech, we won the conference championship. 2 of the 3 years we went to tournament, and then we went to the playoffs and started winning. And it always opens up other opportunities. Washington State the same way. You know, Karen would want something from the grocery store, you know, on Saturday or something. I'd always take Cullen and Lauren, and that's when they noticed, you know, people, you know, asking their dad for autographs and stuff. So that was different for them. And then when we got to Oklahoma, you know, the cell phone thing came in with pictures and all that stuff. But they weren't old enough to realize what was happening. They just knew that, you know, people talked to their dad or came up to their dad different than the other dads. But Karen and I did a good job with that stuff and made them realize it's just, all coaches do this. It just goes with the territory. But I think we also did a good job of keeping things normal. Lauren always had her group of friends. Kellen would always have a group of friends. So they always saw Karen and I as Kellen and Lauren's mother and father. They never saw me as anything other than that. And that's really what I wanted to be. I wanted to be Lauren's dad. I wanted to be Kellen's dad. I didn't want to be anybody else. So when I come home, especially in the spring and summer, first thing we do is I had a little blue minivan. So the kids would be over. I'd put about 10 of them in that minivan, and we'd drive to a local park, like a baseball field. And I was the all-time pitcher. And we played games. You know, there was no fence there, so if you hit it between the left fielder and the center fielder, it might roll 500 yards. So if you did that, you got to run. But I enjoyed being a father, it was a great balance for me, in that as soon as I left campus, my thoughts started going to Kellen and Lauren. What were we going to do? Because they'd be waiting on us. Karen's got a picture when at our house in Pullman, you could open the curtain, and Kellen he's just a little boy, he would open the curtain, and Karen took a picture of him. He'd always wait for the car to come in the driveway. As soon as he saw those lights, he knew I was coming home. So he'd run down the stairs, go to the door, and he was ready to go. I may have just had a 10-hour day. It didn't matter to Kellen or Lauren. They said, let's go play.
That's amazing.
So I said, you guys do realize I'm not y'all's age. So they thought, they just saw, they saw their father, and that's all. They never equated with me being a coach, and I always thought that was a blessing.
That's amazing. If you could tell the parents of elementary school athletes one thing, what would it be?
Let things happen organically, and be honest with yourself. Not every kid's going to be a pro. Not every kid's going to be a college player. Not every kid's going to make their high school team. But be an encourager. Don't ever be a discourager. At some point they're going to fall down, and you can't always put a pillow under them. Sometimes falling down is important. I tried to always let, like Lauren tried out for another team later. As she grew up, her body was changing, and she was at a different place, and she realized that her basketball career was ending. But she made that choice, and whatever choice they made, the only time that I encouraged or discouraged something was Kellen in soccer. I didn't like soccer, and I realized that the soccer, a little recreation Saturday league thing he was doing, was in a town 30 miles away, and this is what made the decision. You couldn't rain out a soccer game. I said, what? Wait a minute, he's got a soccer game 30 miles away. He was about 10 years old, and it's raining outside. It's going to be raining. Well, they still have to play the game. So I said, Kelvin, come over here for a minute. Let's talk about this. So that's the only time I interjected and said, you could be spending this time in the gym. You can go up to the gym with Dad, and we can get a workout in. But I would encourage that, is encourage them, and then talk to them with respect too. Whether you're there's so many parents that aren't honest with their children, but when you got a kid that's really, really, really good, just make sure he understands he's part of a team. The team name's on the front, but encourage them and let them make their own decisions.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today on The Journey. Stay tuned for the next episode where we talk about middle school.